just click record. There we go.
Cool. So hi everyone, really excited to be here. Hopefully you guys are having a good time at the hackathon so far. So today I'll be presenting on exploring data-driven advocacy. So I am from the Percentage Project, and then I will give you guys a bit of an overview of what our organization does. So let's get started. So really quickly, an intro first. So my name is Wei-Zan, and I'm an outreach associate from the Percentage Project. I'm a recent college grad myself, so I just graduated last May, and I'm now working at Google. But I mostly spend a lot of my free time helping out with the Percentage Project since the mission really resonates with me. So we're a nonprofit where we are an artistic visual outlet, and we present data from an annual anonymous survey of computer science students across the US. And I'll get into a bit more detail about what exactly the survey covers, but effectively we take a lot of the data from this anonymous survey, and we use it in a data-driven way to really focus on what the numbers can showcase about the climate of computer science education today. So let's really quickly go through what I'll cover today. So I'm sure a lot of you don't know too much about the Percentage Project as an organization, so I'll just quickly cover that. And then I'll talk about our survey and some really interesting survey results that we've had, along with the methodology, demographics, and the overall insights. And then at the end, if there's time, happy to take questions or just host any discussion there. So before we dive in any deeper, I just want everyone to know that the goal of the session today isn't to teach you how to do any data science or analysis or anything like that, but rather just to learn more about how you can use data for social impact. And how you can use it in a way that can really drive advocacy in the realms of nonprofits. So let's get started with learning a bit more about who the Percentage, or what the Percentage Project is. And before we do, just to kind of get into the spirit of things, since we are a nonprofit that uses an annual survey, let's just get started with this poll here. So you can join this active poll at slido.com. And there's that 4-letter code there. So once you join at slido.com and you input that, then you can participate in this poll as well as a few others later on in today's session. And really the idea is just to kind of get you guys to start thinking about what your own experiences have been like in college. What have you thought about your own college computer science education so far? So if you get a chance, just join at slido.com. And the first poll for you guys is, what words would you use to describe your college's computer science department? And this can be anything that jumps into your head, and definitely feel free to input more than one word. So let me know if there are any issues with joining the interactive poll. If no one feels comfortable sharing what words that they think of, okay, cool. So someone wrote intensive. I can also share some words that I've seen at some previous sessions. So I've seen words like challenging or competitive. I have seen intense before as well, which is very similar to intensive. Theory-based, that's really cool. I know a lot of people think comp sci is, just about coding, but obviously there's a lot of theory behind it as well. Some other words I've seen on a more optimistic or positive note are things like fun, or I think someone said something about a lot of cooperation on group projects and whatnot. So definitely a lot of different ways to describe a college CS education. But I think definitely words like intensive, challenging, hard tend to come up a lot. Opportunities, I think that's a good one as well. Obviously, there's a lot of directions you could go with a CS education. Interesting, okay, I'm glad to see that people find CS interesting. Hopefully explains why you're here on a hackathon. But definitely mixed bag is a good word, I would say. It really does cement, or it's a really good way to describe the many different dimensions of this kind of education. So cool, thank you guys all for participating. So just keep these words in mind. This is how you experience your education. And it might just be interesting to consider whether others have similar experiences. So cool. Jumping in a bit more then. So the percentage project is meant to kind of encourage everyone to have a positive CS education, so that for polls like the previous slide, hopefully we'll have more positive or optimistic words popping up. And part of doing that involves helping people from every background embrace their diversity and feeling a sense of belonging in the field. So in this case, in computer science. Obviously a very ambitious, high-level vision, but that is what drives us forward. So kind of getting more into the survey that we run every year, we tend to ask questions like the one that you see on the screen here. So this is an example of an actual question that has shown up in our past surveys. Do you feel intimidated studying computer science? And this is just a really interesting question. We can just see how this current group here feels. And of course, we can compare it across other results that we've had in the past. So I'll leave it up for a few more seconds if anyone else wants to answer as well. Okay, cool. So it looks like 3/4 of the crowd does feel intimidated studying computer science and 1/4 does not. And I think this is a pretty interesting breakdown. And obviously there's a lot of factors that might, influence what your answer is here. Here, for anyone who's interested, these are the results that we had from the 2019 to 2020 school year survey result across all of the colleges that participated in our survey. So 45% of participating students answered that yes, they do feel intimidated, versus, and this might be interesting compared to the 75% that we saw on the previous slide with this crowd here. And again, there's a lot of different dimensions and factors that might influence what this result comes out to be. And we're actually going to spend a good chunk of today's session deep diving into the different demographic breakdowns, whether particular groups of students feel one way versus the other. And perhaps you guys might feel like you identify with one or more of those demographic groups. So it's just interesting to see, the results do vary across different demographics. So we have statistics like the one you saw on the previous slide. And what we do with that is we pair this with an annual social media campaign. So we take the responses from our students and we create photos such as the one that you see here. And this photo campaign, I like to think of it as kind of like Humans of New York, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. But it's Humans of New York with a twist. So with the students taking front and center, and with a data approach as opposed to, those like paragraphs and stories and whatnot. So we're really pairing all of these statistics and results and pairing them with the faces of our students. So the students themselves get to choose which statistic they feel like they resonate with the most. And we pair these together to create blackout on social media and to spread awareness of exactly what the current state of CS education is. The next step that we do beyond working with students on this is partnering directly with these departments at schools. So we do share the data that is collected, obviously anonymized, with the department so that they have a better understanding of what exactly their students are feeling and how they are experiencing the CS education. And this is meant to empower departments to improve their own education. And then lastly, our last step is with everyone. And this sounds kind of vague, but what we mean is we partner across the US with a bunch of different schools to have an anonymized benchmark. So nothing is school specific. We aggregate the data for a national benchmark so that schools have something to compare against and so they know how they're doing compared to the national average. So this is a way of holding everyone accountable and making sure that the direction of education moving forwards is in a positive one. So here's a really brief overview of our history. So we're actually fairly new as a nonprofit, and we first started at the University of Pennsylvania in 2018. And by the end of 2019, we had expanded to 4 more schools, so including Brown, Duke, and Rutgers. And this campaign is now taking place across 11 schools this year. Sorry, 13 schools. So here are some example shots from our 2018 campaign. So you can see it's a data-driven social campaign with relevant statistics paired with student photographs. We have more shots in 2019. And then from last year, which was fully remote because of COVID. And you can see here some example statistics. So for example, the first one, 20% of first generation students have been told that being a first-generation student has unfairly contributed to their acceptance to university. So these are just some examples of pictures that we've had in our previous campaigns, and you can find all of them online at our website, which I'll link at the end of the presentation as well. So hopefully that gives you a good taste of what we do as an organization. And now I'd like to get more into the actual survey itself, which I think has some of the really interesting insights and statistics. So before getting into the results, just making sure we're all on the same page and understand how we approach this. So we asked and surveyed students majoring or minoring in computing related disciplines. So this might include something like computer engineering in addition to computer science. All responses are fully anonymized and participants know this. And each student has an individualized survey link so that there can't be any duplicate survey respondents. And all participants are made aware of what the goal of the survey is, and also the fact that it's fully voluntary so they can stop and withdraw at any point. And again, as I mentioned previously, only aggregated data, so nothing school specific is released as a benchmark. So for this 2019 to 2020 school year, we surveyed 5,600 students across 3 universities with an 18% response rate. So 1,010 students responded. And this gave us a 3% margin of error, 95% confidence. But as we go through the results, we do keep in mind that there are certainly some survey biases and we can't account for all of them. And what this really means is that even though we have these statistical results, we're not saying that each number fully represents any person or organization. Obviously, you can't claim to represent individuals in that way. And in order to prevent any risks of identifying people from smaller demographics, if it makes up less than 1% of the population, then we don't discuss some demographic groups. So this explains why not all of the numbers might add up to 100%. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a website with a full report and additional data. So if you're intrigued by any of the results we see, definitely take the time to hop onto our website. Cool. So let's get to understand who exactly we surveyed amongst those 1,000 students. So it was a pretty even breakdown across the 4 years of college. So freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors. And as I mentioned, mostly computer science related majors with some minors as well. Most students, you can see here, about 45% responded as Asian, 34.7% as white, 4.3% as Black or African American, and 8.4% as mixed, and then some smaller demographic groups as well. We asked about ethnicity, so if students are of Hispanic, Latinx, or Spanish origin, and 6.4% did identify. We also asked about students' gender identities, and it's a 50.3% split of man versus 46.5% identifying as women, and 1.2% as non-binary. And we asked if students identify as LGBTQ+, with 15.7% agreeing. And then we also ask about first generation, because this can indicate how someone feels in a school environment. So 13.3% identifying as first generation, and 14.6% identifying as low income. And the last question is we ask if students identify as having a disability, with 4.2% saying yes. So now we have an idea of who exactly the survey population comprises of, so we can look into some of these survey results, which I find the most interesting part. So we ask questions in a lot of different dimensions, and one of the most important ones is student culture. So whether or not students feel like they belong and they enjoy the environment that they're in. So here is an example of a question from the survey. Someone has once claimed to me that blank has unfairly contributed to my acceptance to my university. So fill in the blank there with a lot of the different dimension breakdowns. So it could be race, ethnicity, gender, etc. So for the breakdown of this question across race, you'll see the results here. And I think it's quite noticeable that for Black or African American students, 76.7% of them agreed with this statement. And that's overwhelming compared to the other race categories that you see listed in this graph. So this certainly has a lot of implications. So whether or not you feel like even welcome to be studying at a university. It seems like a lot of students have different approaches or different responses to this question because of their race. That can make you question like whether or not the culture at universities are welcoming people depending on their race or not. Along a similar vein, we also ask if students feel that certain demographics has unfairly given me an advantage in gaining job opportunities. So one example is whether or not your ethnicity influences that. So this is actually something I'm curious to hear what you guys think. So do you guys think that students who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, or Spanish origin, do you think that they're more commonly told that their ethnicity gave them an unfair advantage in gaining job opportunities? Or do you think it's the other way around? So people who don't identify as Hispanic are more commonly told that they have an unfair advantage in gaining job opportunities. I think this question is phrased in a potentially confusing way, but just take a moment to read through it and think to yourself, intuitively, which do you think is more likely, or what do you think is the case? Okay, so it seems like there is consensus in the crowd that students who don't identify, oh, okay, so we have someone who is controversial opinion, they think the opposite. This is, I think, frankly, very interesting. So the results show that students who identify as Hispanic are more commonly told that their ethnicity gave them an unfair advantage in gaining job opportunities. And this is such an interesting statistic because our president of the Percentage Project, she had once presented these statistics to a recruiter, and the recruiter had thought that she had misspoke and that she had somehow swapped the numbers by accident. Like she was not confident that the numbers didn't make sense and must have been said in the wrong order. So that just really goes to show that our preconceptions of what is the case is not necessarily true and doesn't necessarily reflect the reality that these students actually face themselves. So I think this is interesting. You can't claim to always know what others are thinking because you might not be right. Cool. So another question that we ask is whether or not students have had comments made on their identity that made them uncomfortable, angry, or insecure. And you'll see here that here's the graph for the demographic breakdown across LGBTQ+. And you'll notice that students who identify as LGBTQ+, tend to agree more with this statement. Besides student culture, we also had a whole group of questions about learning environment. So really zeroing on the education aspect. So one is, I generally feel comfortable asking questions during lecture. And this is obviously a very important question to consider for departments since lectures are the spaces where most of the learning happens. And it might be a bit disappointing to see that even the highest group, so for male students, just over half of students agree that they feel comfortable asking questions. So only about half of students feel like they can speak up in lecture. That may or may not point out at something important for departments to consider. And of course, you'll notice that for students who identify as women, that number is less than half of that. So less than a quarter of female students feel comfortable asking questions. A similar question that we have on the survey is whether or not students feel comfortable asking in office hours. And this is with other TAs and other students, so it might not be surprising that the number of students who feel comfortable is higher than in the previous slide. But you can still see here that there is a difference between students who identify as first generation versus not. So almost 10% difference between the proportion of students who feel comfortable. So as a whole, first generation students feel less comfortable asking questions in office hours. And then kind of combining the previous two questions, how students think that their professors and TAs feel about them. And these numbers are overall pretty positive, but what stands out to me is that most of these races hover around 80% of students agreeing with the statement, but for Black or African American students, only 67, around 2/3 of students agree. So there's a noticeable smaller proportion of students agreeing with the statement there. So this might reflect something about how certain groups are welcomed or respected in their environments. And then coming full circle, here is the question I asked you guys at the very start of this session, whether or not you feel intimidated studying computer science. And I had shown you that at the beginning, 45% of students had agreed with the statement. But over here with the demographic, so we chose to showcase the one on low income students. You'll notice that a lot more students who identify as low income tend to agree with the statement than those who don't identify as low income. And it's interesting comparing this across other demographics as well. So whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, etc. So if you're interested in that, you can find those additional results online. So for the next few slides, we're going to kind of zoom away from this demographic breakdown, and we're going to look at aggregated results across all students. So I wanted to give a quick trigger warning since I'll be talking about sexual harassment. So if this topic is too heavy for any of you guys, definitely feel free to take a break and come back in a bit. So one of the questions that we ask on the survey is whether or not students have ever experienced any form of sexual harassment. And you'll notice that around 2/3 of respondents said that no, they have not experienced any form of sexual harassment. But then we change the question and tweak it just a bit. So we instead ask if students know of someone, which could include themselves, but could include others as well, who has been affected. And you'll see that the numbers basically flip, where we now have almost 2/3 of students saying yes, they do know someone who's been affected by sexual harassment. So this is a pretty powerful or interesting statistic to look at, since just by expanding the degree by one, you suddenly have a very different narrative that completely flips what the story looks like. Some other questions that we ask kind of highlights the power of words and the importance of word choice. So we ask students if they consider themselves a feminist. And we have just under 2/3 of students agreeing that yes, they do consider themselves a feminist. Similar to the previous slide, we then modify the question a tiny bit later on in the survey. And we instead say, given the definition that feminism is the belief in equality of sexes, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, etc., do you consider yourself a feminist? And of course, there are different definitions, but this is the one that we include in the survey itself. And suddenly the number goes from 2/3 of people agreeing to 90% of students agreeing with considering themselves a feminist. So this really goes to show that your word choice and how you use your words can really influence or change how others perceive things. So really indicating the power that words can have. So I gave you guys a quick snapshot of some of the selected data that we have, and I think they all paint a pretty interesting picture about the current state of climate in computer science departments. We also have other survey data asking questions like, do you think minority organizations are still needed today? Or based on your understanding of feminism, would you admit in conversation that you're a feminist? We ask, if a TA acted inappropriately, would you feel comfortable telling the professor or other TAs? Or if you think that conscious and unconscious biases against certain groups still exist today. So we have a lot of other additional questions. These are just some examples of what else we ask survey participants. And all of the data or statistical results of these questions are available on our website. Cool. So I hope you guys found some of the results presented today interesting or insightful. And as a food for thought, or just perhaps as takeaways that you can kind of ponder in the back of your mind after this session, we have some questions for you guys to basically think on. So do you think that you've personally ever experienced or seen someone else experience anything that the data outlined? Whether or not you think that the student culture at your school is inclusive or isn't? And if you have any examples to explain that. I don't know if this is true, but perhaps the data changed your mind about something today, and it illustrated something that you didn't know beforehand, or that you just didn't notice beforehand. And then taking it one step further, if there's any way of addressing some of the issues that we saw in the slides today, and something that I found really inspiring. So at a previous hackathon that I presented at, someone thought that the slide on the sexual harassment statistics was really impactful or just something really serious. And they actually ended up centering their hackathon project around that. So they decided to build a hackathon project to solve for sexual harassment and to encourage women or anyone else who might be concerned about it to be able to easily inform their friends and family and to call for help. And fun fact, that hackathon actually won best overall hack at that hackathon. So I think overall, like these results and these data, they really do paint an interesting picture, but we can take it one step further and try and address some of the issues that the data outlines and the data illustrates about. Cool. So if you guys have any thoughts for any of the questions that I posted earlier on the slide, go ahead to tinyurl.com/VT-percent. Would love to hear your feedback or your thoughts on any of the things that you saw in this presentation today. So whether any of these questions here on the slide gave you any interesting thoughts or just general overall feedback, we would be super happy to hear anything you might think there. So I'll leave a URL up for a second in case anyone wants to jot that down or visit that URL.
Yep, I just posted it in the chat so people can view it.
Perfect. Thank you, Zane. Appreciate it. Great. So this is the last slide, but I just wanted to make sure you guys have the resources if anyone is curious to learn more. So our website is percentageproject.com. So that has all of our data from the 2019 to 2020 survey year, along with other additional resources. We have a newsletter, so if you're curious about that, you can sign up at linktree/percentageproject. We are also very active on social media, so feel free to follow us at Facebook or Instagram. I'd say we're most active on those two. Particularly Instagram, we have a very aesthetic feed. I'm making a plug for it. I don't personally work on our Instagram account, but our team does a great job where we post lots of interesting resources and information and just ways to get involved. And you can also follow us at LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you're interested in bringing this to your own campus, if you feel like your campus could stand to benefit from having someone kind of organizing the survey and kind of illustrating the climate at your school, email us at hello@percentageproject.com. We're always happy to learn. We're always happy to onboard new people if you want to bring this to your own school campus. Great. Thank you so much, Zane, for sharing all of the URLs in the chat. So that is it for me. Happy to take any questions or if anyone has any thoughts they want to share. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining the session. I hope you guys learned something interesting. And either way, good luck with the rest of the hackathon. I heard that the projects are due at 11 a.m. tomorrow. So best of luck to everyone. Hopefully you guys build super cool hacks, super cool projects.